And here we go. Hi, folks. HC here. Today I'm going to be chatting with Adrian Gibson, the author, illustrator, podcaster, bon vivant, man about town, I'm sure. If you don't know him, I don't know what I could possibly do to help you, other than let him introduce himself, who can do a much better job.
Well, that's the first time I've been called a bon vivant, so I appreciate that.
Okay.
That's a first for everything. My name's Adrian M Gibson. I am the author of Mushroom Blues, which is my debut novel. Fungal punk noir police procedural is kind of how I encapsulate it. That came out in March, and I'm also the creator and co-host of SFF Addicts podcast, which I've been doing a little over 3 years now. MJ Kuhn, whose book is actually right here,
I was
is my
thinking that was a very
co-host.
subtle plug.
And then I'm just gonna put my book and cover that one up. But yeah, I've been doing that for 3 years. MJ and I chat with authors from across the board and learn about their careers, their experiences in publishing and writing and all that, as well as tapping them for their knowledge with writing master classes.
And are you there? There we go. Okay. Oh, you're freezing on me.
You're freezing on me too,
Oh, okay. Well,
but
there
you're
we go
back
then.
now. It's all good.
Okay. And today we are going to be speaking about Jeff Vandermeer, an author who I have frankly been intimidated to read, but Mr. Gibson here is going to tell us why or what's so special about Jeff Vandermeer.
I mean, Jeff Vandermeer is. I first encountered him when I was 21 years old. This was when I was living in Berlin, Germany, and I just encountered this amazing bookshop called Otherlands, which ended up being one of my frequent haunts in
Mm-hmm.
Berlin because it was entirely science fiction and fantasy and horror. It was the only SFFH specialty bookshop in Berlin. And so I'd go there and I would just browse. They had a huge English section. They had lots of books in German, of course, but the English section was incredible. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just perused through there and started talking to the people that worked there and getting recommendations from them. I told them I'm really into Philip K. Dick. And then they sort of introduced me to the new weird movement with authors like Jeff Vandermeer and China Mieville. And the first book that I read by Jeff Vandermeer, which had just come out, this was back in 2013, and that was the year his Southern Reach trilogy came out. So it was quite a rapid release. It was Annihilation towards the beginning of the year. Summer was Authority, and then in the fall was Acceptance. So boom, boom, boom. These three books that made up. Uh, I have the collected volume now,
Very
sort of
nice.
omnibus. So those three books came out within pretty much a 10-month span.
And that was
And
2013.
yep.
I
And
had the. Why did I think it was much more recent? Okay.
maybe because of the movie, there was a movie
I hope not.
adaptation. Um,
I hope I was aware of it before then.
but yeah, so I went to that bookstore and got these recommendations when
Mm-hmm.
Annihilation and Authority were already out. So I read Annihilation, and that was probably one of the most intense and surreal reading experiences that I've ever had. Where I read this book and it felt like a fever dream,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so enraptured by it, by the prose, by the mystery of it, by the way it speaks of nature and the human condition,
Mm-hmm.
and the atmosphere was just all encompassing and so strange and beautiful. And I burned through that book in a couple of days, and then I went back to the bookstore and bought Authority.
Okay.
Um, but Annihilation single-handedly was the book that convinced me to take up writing professionally, or at least
Okay.
to think about it in a more professional context. Because
Mm-hmm.
up to that point, I'd never taken it super seriously the way that I'd taken other creative endeavors. And reading Annihilation was the book that made me think, if I could ever write anything this good in my life, I will feel like I've accomplished something.
Okay. So, first of all, yeah, I meant to ask how did you encounter him? So, okay, that was a good hand sell by a bookseller. Um, can you remember what it was about anything? Was there anything in particular, or was it just the experience as a whole that made you think, yes, this is what I want to do?
It was the experience as a whole,
Okay.
because it was just like encapsulated within this single book. I don't even think it's that long. It's not even 300 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It made me feel emotions that I'd rarely felt while reading. Genuine fear and discomfort, and a curiosity that was something that I've experienced over the course of my life when it comes to creative stuff, is like a curiosity that nags at you and kind of, um,
Okay.
it's like a slow unraveling of this idea or this connection with something, where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I just have to keep going. I have to keep
Sure.
going
Yeah.
and pursue it. And in this case, it was the pursuit of a story and its ending. And
Mm-hmm.
the atmosphere of that book takes place in sort of an unnamed uh, geographical location on the east coast of the United States, but there's this like alien dome that essentially plants itself on Earth and creates this strange uh, uh, landscape that is called Area X and is being subtly altered and manipulated by unknown forces. And so the entire book feels like your mind is kind of devolving into psychosis in a lot of
Oh,
ways.
really? Okay.
So it's this very visceral experience, and I'd never felt something so um, so powerful on the page before. I've had tons of books when I was growing up where I loved them, absolutely loved
Sure.
the adventure, the characters, and all this kind of stuff. But this was the first experience that I'd ever felt such a mix of emotions, where I was
Mm-hmm.
vividly uncomfortable with what was happening in this book, but it wasn't the kind of feeling that put me off of it. I'm the kind of
Mm-hmm.
person that kind of dives deeper into things when they make me feel uncomfortable. And
Sure.
so
Sure.
I just, I was absorbed in it, much like the main character in the book, the biologist, is slowly succumbing to the madness of Area X.
Okay. Um. So you you said atmosphere. You said atmosphere at least twice. Um. Is there something about is that just a Annihilation or a Southern Reach thing, or is that one of those things that he does in all of his work? Is he just there's an atmosphere that's created that just keeps you?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest
Okay.
uh, kind of takeaways that I have from reading Jeff Vandermeer's work,
Mm-hmm.
but also one of the biggest factors that has influenced my own work as a result of reading him. But out of everything that I've read, uh, there is a distinct atmosphere and mood for each setting that he creates. So the Southern Reach trilogy is all set in Area X or around Area X or places in relation to Area X. And that is very evocative in terms of uh, the sort of sublime um, sort of surrealism of that
Mm-hmm.
landscape. But then you have his Ambergris trilogy with Shriek and City of Saints and Madmen, and then Finch, which all were huge inspirations for my own book, Mushroom Blues. But it takes place in a sort of Victorian, Edwardian inspired um, sort of fantasy setting, set in a city where humans colonize the land that was once inhabited by these fungal people, and the fungal people were driven underground. And then much of the Ambergris trilogy takes place when those fungal people have resurged and are taking back, recolonizing the land that was once colonized and taken away from them. And so
Hmm.
that though those books are just dripping, oozing with atmosphere. Like the descriptions that he has of the city itself, or the maritime whaling culture of the humans that settled there, the smells of food and fish and seafood and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when the fungal people become involved, the visceral descriptions of mold and fungi and fruiting bodies and these just the dampness of everything and the
Hmm.
smells of decomposition and things like that. Then you have other books that are set in
And
real world
just you
locations.
talking about that, I'm getting
Perfect.
dampness and fungals. Yes.
Yeah. And then he has other books like Born. Born is crazy. That one is like in a future where it's basically like climate apocalypse, and there are mutant, like climate apocalypse, but also like nuclear apocalypse. There are like mutant creatures. There's like a giant mutant bear that like floats around this landscape. Everyone is essentially living in trash and and this devastated apocalyptic post-apocalyptic landscape, and the atmosphere that he creates there as well is
Hmm.
so strong and so evocative of setting you in the world and in the context of what the characters are living and experiencing in relation to that world. So he's really, really good at creating that connection between atmosphere as an evocation of the world and establishing a really strong world building foundation, and then all of that providing really fruitful and um, like logically consistent characterization and sort of background for the characters that are the center of those stories.
Okay. Wow. All right. And am I right that and you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, that the nature or just environmental factors come into this? Come in? Is it? I'm guessing this is all of his work. That this is a thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Big
nature is a huge theme across his work.
thing. Hmm.
Whether it's Area X and the literal environment that is creeping into the mind and body of the characters in the Southern Reach trilogy. Um, there's this kind of dichotomy between sublime nature as this thing that we humans believe we can control,
Hmm.
but so often in his stories, nature proves that it is untamable. And so that is really evident in the Southern Reach trilogy, in the Ambergris trilogy, where the fungal people are direct representations of
Sure.
nature.
Hmm.
And there's the subversion there where the fungal people are controlling the the human population who once colonized them and kicked them out and devastated their their environment and their lifestyle and their culture.
Hmm.
And then you have other stories like Hummingbird Salamander, um,
Which is
which
a great
is
title.
such a great title. That one is set in the real world and visits various locations that people will be familiar with.
Oh, okay.
Like the west coast of the United States and places like that. Um, that is more of like an ecological thriller, and I would say
Hmm.
like one of his least weird works.
Okay.
But that book still delves into the ways in which humans are trying to control nature, specifically through an illegal animal trade. In the case of
Hmm.
this book, and the ways in which he discusses ecological decline and animal depopulation and extinction and those kinds of things through the lens of this thriller that is focused on this illegal animal trade. So it's really interesting the ways in which he tackles environment in his book and nature and the relationship between humans and the natural world. And in fact, the ways that in our hubris, we've created a disconnect with the natural world.
Hmm.
But in reality, we are one and the same, and we are natural extensions of the environment in which we were born and bred.
Okay. Um, would you say he's got? Oh, I'm not even sure exactly how to phrase this. With many authors, especially if they write, variety of series, variety of whatever, you get to a certain point, like, oh, that's character type X and character type Y for this guy, or
Okay.
does he have, or are his characters and stories, are they as varied as the worlds that you've been talking about, or
Yeah.
is there like a
I
Vandermeer type?
No, I
Okay.
think his characterization is pretty varied as much as his uh I would say creative weirdness in terms of the environments and the settings
Hmm.
that he sets his books in. His characters are all over the place. It's like you have young characters, young female characters. You have in Hummingbird Salamander, it's like a middle-aged woman. Finch is very much tapping into the hard-boiled noir detective kind of tropes, and you
Okay.
have the,
Hmm.
you have the middle-aged male detective and the ways in which he leans into certain tropes and the way in which he subverts a lot of them at the same time. Born, it takes its main character is, I can't remember exactly how old she is, but she's like very very young adult. I would say like 17 to 19 years old, and the ways in which she's navigating this environment. He even has written YA, some books where the main characters are children.
Hmm.
Um, in Shriek, the it's kind of like an epistolary novel, so there's a lot of letters going back and forth and notes about the world and everything that's going on. That's basically between a dysfunctional brother and sister. Um,
Okay.
so, and then Annihilation and the Southern Reach trilogy, it's like you have the unnamed biologist character,
Hmm.
and then in Authority, you you get different perspectives from characters who are working for this organization called the Southern Reach. And then Acceptance is kind of like a mix of different characters. So his characterization is all over the place, with some characters being more successful than others. But I applaud him for
Sure.
always trying new things with his stories and being very
Hmm.
experimental.
Yeah.
And that also equates to the ways in which he approaches characters.
Okay. Yeah. Experimental. That seems that just um, I don't know. That's a good impression for what I've seen. You know,
Mm-hmm.
looking at covers and skimming blurbs.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I can show off some covers right now. Like
oh,
you
really?
got
Okay.
these are like the trippy new covers for the Ambergris trilogy
Alrighty.
with these like melty mushrooms.
Uh huh.
Um,
Can't see why you'd
this
be attracted to that.
this is the old, or not the oldest, but these are two of the other. This is City of Saints and Madmen. This is the cover set before the melty mushrooms. But I equally
Oh,
love these, just like these beautiful illustrated
yeah.
kind of style. That Shriek right there.
Mm-hmm.
This is another one of his books, same style, but just a standalone, called Venice Underground,
Okay.
which is
Cool.
fantastic.
And you
And
came
then
prepared for this.
yeah, and then I also have this, which is it's an illustrated sort of like writing guide,
Mm-hmm.
called Wonder Book, which is just as weird.
Oh, that's one of those you want to get just for the cover.
Oh, not just the cover, but like the illustrations on the inside is just like pure psychedelia. It's beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
And I assume that the writing tips are pretty good too.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
general. This is probably one of the most engaging writing craft books that I've ever read.
Oh, cool. Okay. So you talked about some characters not being that successful because because he's taking risks, and sometimes that doesn't pan out. Are there other things that you weaknesses that you think are characteristic, or is it just on this book he tried something and it didn't work?
I think it's more case by case basis.
Okay, good.
Because there are some books that can really, click with someone.
Yeah.
Finch is detective noir. If you love sort of like murder mysteries, detective
Mm-hmm.
fiction, that book is going to click with you more. But then if you realize like, oh, this is like book three in a trilogy, and you go back and read City of Saints and Madmen or Shriek, those books are very different. Uh,
Right.
the like not necessarily in terms of its representation of this setting, but stylistically, the way it approaches prose and different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, City of Saints and Madmen is a short story collection. Shriek and Afterward is, I told you, a epistolary novel. So it's like
Yeah.
you're reading these letters back and forth between this brother and sister. He has books like Dead Astronaut, which is, I believe, a spin-off of Born. Um, and that book is super experimental, especially in terms of the way he approached prose. That
Mm-hmm.
one feels probably out of all of his work the most challenging and the most difficult to immerse yourself in. And
Uh-huh.
I could imagine a ton of people bouncing hard off of that book. Um,
Sure.
but it just depends. Like I applaud him for continually taking risks in his career.
Sure.
Um, like if you try and sell someone on Annihilation, be like, hey, you're never gonna figure out the main character's name. Like, you cool with that?
Mm-hmm.
Then awesome. And at the same time, like Annihilation is very strange, and like I was saying earlier, it made me deeply uncomfortable
Yeah.
often. But that kind of feeling is something that I indulge in as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to feeling off put. And so
Yeah.
a lot of it is really subjective. I think if anyone is going to try and approach Jeff Vandermeer's work for the first time, I think it would make sense to sort of read a synopsis of each of the books and figure out like what are your personal tastes. If you
Mm-hmm.
want something that's more accessible, then like Hummingbird Salamander is probably his most structurally straightforward book. Finch as well, even though the setting is very surreal and
Mm-hmm.
different, but those ones are probably like the most structurally familiar for people. Born as well is a very familiar structure, even though the setting is like blah, like crazy wild, like post-apocalypse, like there's like gargantuan floating bear and like trash monsters and shit. So it all depends on how far into the deep end you're willing to go. But I've said this
Sure.
before with friends and people I've chatted with about Philip K. Dick. There are certain Philip K. Dick works that you don't just jump into and you don't go into like
Right.
Valis
Yeah.
or Ubik or something like that. You start out with stuff that is a little bit more um, structurally, and I would say structure is probably the biggest thing, like structurally
Okay.
familiar and structurally
Mm-hmm.
comfortable for people. And then after that, you can start getting more experimental with this author who is
Right.
equally experimental.
Yeah. Once he's got your trust,
Yep,
then you can. All right. I'll go down this path a little bit with this guy.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Are are there recurrent themes? Are there certain I don't want to say messages, but are there certain things that he's addressing throughout the works, or again, is this on a series by series or even book by book kind of thing for him?
I think in his case, he does have a lot of recurring themes. Um, Main one being the relationship between humans
Right.
and nature, and sort of like the sublime nature as a as a powerful force in
Mm-hmm.
our everyday lives and in the world that we inhabit. Um, and then definitely like climate change and uh, environmentalism are
Right.
big things that crop up in relation to nature, but he directly addresses it in a lot of his works. Like Hummingbird Salamander is a big one. Born is a big one. Um, I think dehumanization is a big theme, which as like a huge fan of cyberpunk is something that really clicked with me about Jeff Vandermeer's work,
Sure.
where he uses the environment or certain uh, sociopolitical or cultural dynamics. Like in the Ambergris trilogy, the relationship between the humans and the fungals, the
Mm-hmm.
ways in which the fungals, as a representation of nature, are dehumanizing the human population. Not in a way that is necessarily like innately evil, but in a way that is base nature for them as biological organisms.
Right.
Um, it's just part of their natural order. Or in the case of the Southern Reach trilogy and Area X, Area X is manipulating its environment and changing it ever so slightly, ever so slowly, in such a way that it is establishing its own natural order.
Mm-hmm.
And the biologist and the team that she goes with to basically research Area X, they are anomalies. They're abnormalities within the natural order that is being established within Area X. And so Area X starts to dehumanize them as
Mm-hmm.
it subsumes them into its version of a natural order. And so I think dehumanization in relation with nature are these themes that are really prevalent in Jeff Vandermeer's work, and things that I think work well with the concerns that he has about the real world, in terms of, you know, if you follow him on like any social media platform, he's usually posting about like the animals in his backyard. So the dude clearly loves nature, and he's
Right.
clearly concerned about the ways in which human beings are affecting the
Mm-hmm.
natural world and animal populations and ecosystem destruction and things along those lines.
Yeah.
Um, and so it is really interesting the ways in which he's tackled it, such that it doesn't feel trite and repetitive,
Mm-hmm.
even though he's incorporated this into much of his work.
Okay. No, and for an author, if you have got a main concern along those lines or whatever have you, yeah, I, on the one hand, there's like, oh, okay, I'm just trying to think of an example. Why can't I think of an example of anything? Yeah. Um, but you know, with Hemingway or Faulkner or even Patricia Briggs, just glancing around at my shelves, there are certain like, oh yeah, okay. On the one hand, this is a different world, this is a different series, but yeah, okay, there's something, you start to understand them as a person,
Mm-hmm.
the things that they're concerned with. So even if the world looks totally different, and it sounds like his worlds look totally different in ways that Briggs can't handle, uh, um, that you still get, you come at the same idea in a very different way, but at the same time, it is the same idea. So you're like, this is a Vandermeer work,
Yeah,
because I
exactly.
can
And
tell because we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and in conjunction with that relationship of humanity and nature, he's tackling pretty big philosophical
Right.
ideas
Yeah.
like existentialism versus nihilism, but in the
Hmm.
same way where like existentialism and nihilism kind of separate human beings and human
Yeah.
history from nature. And so it's kind of like a subversion of these philosophical notions while at the same time, characters who are more nihilistic or characters who are more existentialist are kind of clashing ideologically. Nature is at the same time subverting their argument. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like this really, I don't know, I call it like thematic 4D chess kind of thing.
There we go.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Alrighty. And so, okay, annihilation makes you think, yeah, this is the thing I want to do. Obviously, you have some similar interests and stuff like that. But how are there ways where you absolutely know Vandermeer has influenced your writing, or are there ways that you've self consciously modeled your stuff by him or by?
yeah. I mean, so I'm just gonna zoom in. So it's like that's the front cover of Mushroom Blues. This
Right.
is a character named Koji Nameko.
Mm-hmm.
He has a mushroom growing on his head. He's a fungal. So what ended up happening after I read Finch was actually you can see Koji here too. I'll lift my camera up. So that's a drawing that I personally did of Koji.
Oh wow, very nice.
So what ended up happening is I read Finch, and at the time that I read Finch, I was a tattoo artist,
Mm-hmm.
and I started drawing. I went on a trip to Amsterdam with my girlfriend and a group of friends, and while I was there, like I just finished Finch maybe 2 weeks before, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. These mushroom people that Vandermeer had created for that series. And so when I was in Amsterdam, it was raining quite a lot, and we had an Airbnb, and so I spent a lot of time sketching and ended up
Mm-hmm.
drawing a series of mushroom people. But as tattoo designs more than anything,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up developing those initial tattoo ideas into something that was more refined. And throughout the course of my tattoo career as a tattoo artist for a little over 6 years, I tattooed probably 20 to 25 fungal people on clients around the world.
Oh wow.
Uh, so there, like I have one on my ankle, like I tattooed it myself. But then I have friends in here in Ecuador, where I live now. I have friends in British Columbia and Vancouver. I've tattooed people in New York, in Berlin, and different places around Europe. So there are people like on multiple continents who have fungal people tattooed on them because I read Finch and ended up doing more and more of these fungal people designs.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening is that was sort of the the spark that lit the fire for what would become the world that I created for Mushroom Blues, but not just for Mushroom Blues. It's called the Fungal Verse.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a shared universe where there are going to be different series taking place at different parts in this timeline within this world. Um, and so the Mushroom Blues is the start of the Hoffman Report, which is just one series. And then my
Mm-hmm.
next book is going to be the start of another series that takes place decades later in the same world.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so those illustrations, those tattoo designs that I started drawing after I read Finch were the direct lineage from
Mm-hmm.
which came my world building for the Fungal Verse. And when I actually started writing it more seriously, I realized I was having a lot of sort of internal conversations, internal dialogue with with Finch and with that series and with that world
Hmm.
about the ways in which it represented the fungal people, um, and the ways in which I was showing sort of like a flip side of that. Whereas in Finch and the Ambergris trilogy, the mushroom people are more like a hive mind, very much in the way that you would expect mushroom people to be based on what mushroom biology is like.
Right.
But there was a lack of individuality, of course. There was um, sort of a lack of personality for the different mushroom people. It was all kind of like they were all in the same headspace.
Okay.
And it almost felt like they were a very effective antagonistic foil for what those stories necessitated, and the human characters and the ways in which they interacted with that antagonistic foil. And so, what I
Hmm.
ended up doing with Mushroom Blues and other books that I'm going to write in the Fungalverse is to show much more complexity and much more nuance with the mushroom people, and the ways in which they are not only um, interconnected as a community and as a species, but the ways in which they can interact as individuals, the way that they have base desires and instincts and dreams and goals that they want to achieve. So
Hmm.
there is a lot of individuality within the race of fungal people that I have in Mushroom Blues, and a lot of that is just in direct conversation with, like, I love what Jeff Vandermeer did here,
Right.
and then what if, and extrapolate upon that what if.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you have on your mind, or that you just need to get out off your chest about Mr. Vandermeer?
I would love to interview him one day. That would be
Oh, sure.
amazing.
There you go. Get that
Yeah.
out there. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's probably like one of my dreams. He's like, I know a lot of interviewers who have their sort of their dream guests and things like that.
Hmm.
Jeff Vandermeer's definitely in my top three guests to
Sure.
have on SFF Addicts, which would be amazing. Um, I'm also really excited because he pretty much did something that I wanted him to do as like a fan, and he is releasing a new novel next month, um, or probably this month when depending on when this is
Hmm.
released, but like October 22nd, uh, which is a day before my birthday. Thank you, Jeff Vandermeer. He's releasing Absolution, which is like a prequel novel set in the Southern Reach
Oh,
world.
really?
Yeah, so I was like, I would love to see more of the Southern Reach because that was such a
Hmm.
pivotal series for me,
Yeah.
and he fulfilled my wish, and I'm sure the wish of many readers
Sure. Sure.
by writing and now releasing Absolution. So I'm really excited about that. So
Oh, I
thank you,
bet.
Mr. Vandermeer, and keep experimenting because honestly, I love when authors are in a position. I know this is a really difficult thing to say or suggest to authors, especially if you're a debut author. I feel like self-publishing these days allows more room for
Hmm.
experimentation. Traditional publishing, not so much. Experimentation doesn't necessitate um, the financial goals or
Right. Yeah.
wishes of publishers and agents and all that. So uh, I think if there are authors who are in a little bit more like established uh, sort of positions within traditional publishing, or if you're a self-published author who wants to take risks or has an audience that is open to more experimentation, that that is, for me, I think that is where the most interesting literature comes from, is
Sure.
when authors are willing to go outside of their own creative craft comfort zone,
Hmm.
and in so doing encourage readers to read outside of their comfort zone.
Say what?
Right? I know, dude. Because it's so easy. It's so easy to fall into the trappings of like, I love this genre, I love this particular author, and
Right.
um, I know the sort of emotion and the emotions and reactions that I'm going to get from reading
Yeah.
X book by X author. At the same time, like I'm so thankful for those German guys at this bookstore in Berlin for being like, "Hey,
Hmm.
like you like Philip K. Dick, try this." And
Yeah.
the fact that there, especially within the new weird genre, so many authors willing to push the boundaries of genre and style
Hmm.
and prose and world building and stuff like that. That set me off on a path that ultimately led me to where I am today, where I felt confident in releasing a book about mushroom people. And
Hmm.
even though it's like like a detective story, a police procedural, at the same time, there's a lot of weird shit that goes on in that book. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm very thankful for these experimental authors and the ways in which they opened my eyes to being a more experimental reader.
All right. Okay. So, you mentioned at the beginning a little bit, but I want to make sure that you get a chance to plug Mushroom Blues. If people who are watching this haven't heard of this book, I don't know what social media you have been living under for the past few months.
What
Um,
toadstool you've been hiding under?
there you go. That's better than social media under. Anyway, um, that was a sentence that got away from me. Also,
Mm-hmm.
you got the audiobook is about to come out.
Yep. So the audiobook's in post production and should be out depending on when Audible uh, approves it,
Mm-hmm.
sometime in October, hopefully. But yeah, it's in post production and it'll be out very soon.
Very
And
soon. All right.
my narrator, Imogen Church, is absolutely amazing. Very very cool person, but she just like knocked it out of the park. And I got to see her in London, and I did a mushroom tattoo on her.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah,
Well, there you
so
go.
it all comes full
Okay.
circle.
There. Um, and I just blanked on it. I I've looked it up a couple of times today to try to get in my head. Finalist for
SPFBO. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So I'm just like super excited about that, man.
sure.
Because this book is, we've been talking about experimentation. I would say it's
Hmm.
straddling the lines of various genres. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I talked with a group of friends and said like, yeah, it's like I think my book is fantasy enough to submit it to SPFBO.
Hmm.
For anyone who doesn't know, that's the self-published fantasy blog off, which is basically like one of the bigger self-publishing
Yeah.
competitions, but specifically centered around fantasy in this case. And so yeah, there's like 300 books that uh, start out, and then that gets whittled down to, I can't remember how many semifinalists, but then that gets whittled down to 10 finalists, and then one winner out of those 10. So the fact that Mushroom Blues is like the first finalist is
Hmm.
pretty damn wild and really really
Yeah.
cool. And to think like out of 300 books, like my book is in the top 10 is like, well, shit. All right,
Right.
this is a high bar to set for my first book.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
Um,
how are you feeling pressure wise when it comes to number two for the second
um,
book here?
I'm feeling good about it because the book that I'm going to release for book number two is the book that I actually wrote before Mushroom Blues.
Oh, really?
And Mushroom Blues was my break book, where I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm tired because I finished this first draft, this like grueling first draft of Spore City is the name of the book. And so I said like, I've got this reader magnet novella idea that I have. Let me play around with that a little bit. And then that expanded into a full book, and then it ended up becoming my first published book. So now I'm going back and revising Spore City, which I'm really happy about because taking a lot of the lessons that I learned from writing Mushroom Blues, I've been able to improve Spore City
Sure.
exponentially, which I'm really,
And
really excited about.
do you have an estimated release date for that? Projected?
Yeah, it'll come out when it comes out.
Okay, there you go.
I'm hoping for spring of next year. I've already got the cover, so the cover's done. I've got that.
You just got to get the stuff inside the cover.
Yep, exactly. Well, the cover art, and then I have to get the cover design and everything taken care of. But yeah, I'm feeling good about that one.
So the big stuff is
hopefully
done. Now you just the nitty gritty of the actual
exactly
prose.
Yeah, and then like writing some short stories and stuff like that, and having fun with that as well. Just to
good.
Yeah, kind of get out of like the creative rut that I was in after Mushroom Blues came out, because I invested so much damn energy into that. So
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you too.
And Jeff Vandermeer, I think I might have to try something, experiment a little bit. So
Yeah, man.
thanks very much. And let me end recording.